All right. Good morning. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Planning Commission for September 13, 2018 to order. If you would, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Ms. Tusing, any changes to the agenda?
Good morning, Commissioners. Margaret Tusing with Building and Development Services. And yes, there are two changes to the agenda. Item number 9, Z1810, Sarasota Manatee Airport Authority, Televast Road. It's quasi-judicial. There was a typographical error on page 4 that has been corrected, and it was regarding, I believe, whether or not it was in a flood-prone area. Item number 10 is the 10 o'clock time certain, which is the LDC text amendment 1705, ordinance 1803. The process improvements, and this is a added language for the 531 section for schools to make some clarifications that the school board requested.
Thank you. And with regard to the time certain, we'll try to get as close to that. If necessary, we might take a small recess just to
Perfect.
allow
Thank you,
for the
sir.
timing. Thank you. Ms. Shank, anything from the county attorney's office?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next item, and that is the minutes. So have the board members had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any changes, modifications, corrections?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
I'll make a motion to accept the August 9th, 2018 minutes for approval.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is the opportunity for anybody in the audience who wishes to make a comment on something that is not on today's agenda. If you wish to speak on something that is on the agenda, you have an opportunity when that item's heard. But is there anybody who wishes to come forward and speak on something that is not on today's agenda? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to close citizen comments, and we're going to move on to the presentations upon request. And again, just a reminder, these are typically applications that are typical. There's nothing that's come through the process that would indicate that these are controversial. We're going to have an introduction from staff and then an opportunity for the commission to raise any issues from their review, and if there is a need, we'll have a brief presentation, or depending on how involved it gets, we'll modify the hearing accordingly. So Ms. Tusing, can you read item number 4 into the record, please?
Yes, sir. This is item number 4, which is Plan Amendment 1806, Ordinance 1827, FPL Southfork Solar Energy Center. This item has been withdrawn by the applicant because of the adoption of the Ecoplex's
Okay,
Plan
thank
Amendment
you.
and text amendment.
Ms. Schenk, do we need to have any action, board action on this, or just acknowledge?
No, since it's a moot point, you don't have to open a public hearing.
Very good, thank you. So, done. That was easy. All right, Ms. Tusing, could you please read item number 5 into the record?
Item number 5 is PDI 1725G, Gertz Office, which is a quasi-judicial hearing, and Kimberly Middleton is the planner. This is a general development plan for the development of a warehouse office space consisting of 2 buildings, which are approximately 4,500 square feet of warehouse, and Building 2 is 1,500 square feet of office space and approximately 5,000 square feet of warehouse. It is located on 1.18 acres and north of 49th Street East, which is Experimental Farm Road, east of US 41 and west of the Palmetto CSX line. And it is already located in the Planned Development Industrial Zoning District.
Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to open this up for public comment first. So is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward on this item? Okay. Before we move on to the next thing, we need to, this is quasi-judicial, so we need to swear everybody in before there's any testimony. So if you intend to speak on any item on the agenda today that's quasi judicial, please rise to be sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present to the Planning Commission will be truthful and accurate?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, again, is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this application? Okay, seeing no one come forward, I don't know if I did it previously, but we're going to close the public comment portion of this application. Do the board members have any concern with regard to this application? Any question, clarification, information that was maybe not clear? Seeing none. Great job. Oh, we can do that. I thought. Okay. All right. So we're.
Step into the fire.
Get your list of questions ready.
I got the book right here.
Yeah. You've got to do your book report. So.
Gotta do my report. I have to get that A+.
Tell me what you did this summer.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioner Chair and fellow commissioners. My name is Kimberly Middleton. I'm a planner with Manatee County, and I have been sworn. As Ms. Tusing mentioned, the request before you today is to approve a general development plan consisting of 2 buildings with warehouse office space totaling 11,036 square feet on approximately 1.18 acres. The proposed FAR is 0.21, where the maximum FAR permitted is 0.75. It falls within the flood zone X as of March 17th, 2014. That was effective. Again, as Ms. Tusing mentioned, the site is located approximately east of US 41 and north of 49th Street East, also known as Experimental Farm Road. The current zoning district is planned development industrial with a future land use category of industrial light. The applicant is requesting 2 specific approvals. The first approval requesting is to reduce the setback on the west side of the property from 15 feet to 10 feet. And the second specific request is to provide additional foundation landscaping in lieu of providing a landscaped island. Staff does recommend approval for this request. If the commission has any further questions, staff will be here to answer them. Thank you.
Very good. Again, is there any question, clarification, Mr. Rutledge?
Good morning.
Morning.
Good job.
Thank you.
So the question on the setbacks at 10 feet, is there any concerns been raised by the neighbors or anything like that for that exception?
No, we haven't received any sort of public comment or anything like that regarding
Nobody's
this project.
concerned it's 10 feet or 15 feet? I mean, I'm just curious, some of these exceptions we make raise tremendous discussion, others don't. So I'm just curious. There's, other than that, parking seems consistent. Is there any other nuance that you think is noteworthy in your discussions or review of the site?
No, other than the fact that we found that it was compatible because the surrounding uses are actually also warehouse distribution uses. So they're essentially the same use. Directly south is the North River Fire District. It looks like it's becoming a mostly industrial area.
Okay.
Very good. Any additional questions, comments, clarifications? Okay. All right. All right, thank you very much. I guess we'll just go ahead, unless the applicant wants to clarify anything. I think it was pretty clear, the presentation, but if the applicant wishes to come forward and make a statement, we're going to go ahead and, I don't see the applicant identified. Okay. We're going to close the public hearing, and the chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move to recommend approval of PDL 1725G as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Ron. Any additional deliberation? Seeing none. The chair is going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item number, get back to the right screen, item number 6. Ms. Tusing, could you please read item number 6 into the record?
Yes, sir. Item number 6 is PDR 1734ZG, which is SMR Northeast LLC, Lakewood Ranch 1000. Again, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, and Rosina Leiter is the planner. This is the rezoning of an approximately 991-acre site, which is generally located on the east side of Lorraine Road, approximately 0.25 miles south of State Road 70. And the addresses are 3327 and 4715 Lorraine Road, 1616700 State Road 64, and 5010 Uline Road, which is in Bradenton, Manatee County. The rezone is from A, General Agriculture, to PDR, Plan Development Residential, and it's also, approving a general development plan, which is a large project for 1,750 residential units, which will consist of single-family detached, semi-detached, single-family attached, and multifamily, and it's also including a golf course.
Thank you very much. I guess we'll go ahead and get a brief presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Rosina Leiter by the staff, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
The site, as Ms. Toussaint says, is south of State Road 64 and is east of Lorraine Road and going to be bounded for the future alignment of U Lane Road and to the south for Rangeland? No, 44th Avenue East. The applicant is asking for rezone the property to PDR and is with actually the site is part of the northeast quadrant and is with the future land use category of MUCR, MUC1 and MUC3. The project complies with the regulations of the future land use category, and the applicant is asking a specific approval for exceed the length of the cul-de-sac in 2 instances, and to back in and to the private road for multifamily, and to have a stacking parking spaces for multifamily units that we disallow for single-family attached, and the type of units are multifamily but are with the same configuration as single-family attached. Staff is supporting the application, and if you have any particular questions, we are willing to answer.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I just had one.
Mr. Rutledge.
The PUD has some pretty extensive densities kind of detailed in it, 2.8 million square feet of retail, 2 million square feet of office. This particular parcel that the 990-some acres is all zoned residential?
Yes, the MUC future land use category has a provision that says that when it's not planning to have an activity center, the property could be developed only with residential uses. It's one of the provisions of the future land use category.
Okay, so these capacities are held in the PUD at other locations to be presented later, but this is strictly for this residential 1,700 units,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Any additional questions for staff? Thank you. Thank you. Again, this is somewhat of a evolution of process, so please bear with us a little bit. So I think probably the next appropriate thing would be an opportunity for the applicant to provide any additional information that might be appropriate with regard to this application before we go to public comment. Are you wearing bells?
Yes. It's actually called an angel bell. And so when you hear it ring, you can think about someone in heaven. So it's actually a very sweet thing. Some people in the office think I'm a cat walking around. So I kind of started wearing it again just to
thought you were a
annoy
Rays
certain
fan.
people who I hope are watching right now.
More cowbell.
So, good morning.
Good morning.
Dorinda Marvin. For the record, I'm a certified planner with the law firm of Grimes, Goebel, Grimes, Hawkins, Gladfelter, and Galvano. I don't feel the need to burden you with a lot of details, but I really wanted to just specifically address the question that Mr. Rutledge had raised. There's some information in the staff report about the northeast area. That is an area that is 6,500 acres that was the subject of a plan amendment back in 2009, and it set out some maximum numbers for non-residential and residential. So that is a much broader area. You are seeing different projects come in. Today, you are seeing number 3 and number 4 of the residential projects coming in. And so you're correct, those non-residential properties will come in separately, and I wouldn't say that those are entitlements that are held, but those are some maximum capped numbers in our comp plan.
Can
Thank
I
you.
ask one question of the applicant?
Sure.
So in submitting this, which is this component, and we know these opportunities are out there, do you have a allocation plan, or they're just out there for you to pull down when you get to the next 100 acres for commercial or industrial or whatever,
Yeah.
for this owner particularly?
We do, and so some of those projects came in earlier. Lakewood National, Del Webb, Lorraine Corners, we've seen a number of them since 2009. With the LDA, we actually came in and did a master plan that's attached to the LDA, where we looked at where those locations would be. We looked at roadways, utilities, schools, other civic uses, emergency service providers, county facilities, and sort of laid out the land, if you will, with all those uses. We are finding, in fact, that we have too many of certain types of entitlements, and we're working with the staff right now to sort of bring those numbers in the comp plan in line with that master plan that we've done.
And do you feel there's a good, understandable barometer for the transition of warehouse to residential to retail and office? I mean, in working with the county, because I see you as kind of the third party to this, do you find that module works very well in trying to figure that out?
I do, and Mr. Rutledge, one of the things sat and talked with the staff last week about are sort of a broader area. So Lakewood Ranch is not just that 6,500 acres. I mean, we're talking about a 28,000 acre property, and we have land in Sarasota County and Manatee County. And what we're looking at are, the market studies that we're obviously doing internally at Lakewood Ranch, things that we have changed over time, places like Core, on State Road 70 and Lakewood Ranch Boulevard, where we have a concentration of additional industrial. So we have found the need to reallocate throughout the ranch, which is what's changing some of what we're doing in the Northeast Quadrant. And I think being able to sit down, we do so much tracking at Lakewood Ranch. I was able, I say I as if I do it, but certainly someone at SMR is doing it, was able to provide the staff all of the lands, including Manatee and Sarasota, through December of last year, number of homes that were built, number of square feet for non-residential for the entire range. So we can look at those numbers and see where things are going.
Thank you. Thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Roth.
Russ.
Mr. Roth.
So you don't have to submit this now without a site plan, correct?
No, Mr. Roth, there is a general development plan that is a part of this application.
Okay. So my next question is, right now, the sewering for the county goes as far as the church on 64. What's going to happen as far as sewering further down? Will the SMR folks be providing the sewer, or is the county going to have to do it?
We are. So SMR, as a part of the LDA that was approved by the county, it's an agreement that addresses construction of roadways and utilities. And there are thoroughfare roadways that cross throughout this project that will contain utilities. Some of those have begun construction, others are shortly following, and by December of next year, all of those roadways and all of their utilities will be complete. It will bring them to the project site, and then internally within these individual projects, those developers will extend those lines. But the main facilities will be built by SMR. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just
Mr.
one other question, and how will this development encourage or fund or support 44th coming through out there? I mean, does it have any impact on those roads for the county? Is there an allocation of your capital and fees? Or?
I think what your staff would explain, I hate to overstep, but I think what your staff will explain is that in order to fund their construction of 44th Avenue, they have looked at potential for development and impact fee revenue that they will receive from those in order to build 44th.
Gotcha.
I don't know if there's anyone here that would want to speak to that, but that would be my general understanding.
We'll give them an opportunity if needed. Thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and open this application up for public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this application? Anybody at all? Okay, seeing no one come forward to speak on this application, we're going to close the public comment portion of the hearing. And staff, is there any additional clarification with regard to Mr. Rutledge's and possibly Mr. Roth's comment?
Good morning. For the record, Clark Davis, Transportation Planning Division Manager. I need to be sworn in. So.
There's one in every crowd. Again, let's take the opportunity. If anybody plans to speak, go ahead and rise to be sworn in. So,
Do you swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present to the Planning Commission will be truthful and accurate?
thank you. Remember, you're under oath.
And the word accurate was used.
Wicked.
We'll strive for accuracy. Good morning again. For the record, Clark Davis, Transportation Planning Division Manager. I've now been sworn in. The question was about 44th Avenue. That the county has a series of 44th Avenue projects, some of which are complete, some which are still ongoing, that extend from First all the way to almost to Lakewood Ranch Boulevard. From there through the approved developments of regional impact for the Lakewood Center and Northwest sector, the DRIs have been building those roads, and then that takes you to Lorraine. The project that you're considering today is on the east side of Lorraine Road, and as part of those, the Northeast Quadrant Local Development Agreement, 44th Avenue is one of those several roads that Ms. Marvin referenced that's being built to crisscross that entire Northeast Quadrant area, and so there are provisions being made for it. And they're building 4-lane roads for the most part. The first 2 lanes are considered site-related. They unlock the land basically for development or used for access, and then we're providing impact fee credits for the additional right-of-way and lanes associated with widening them to 4 lanes.
Thank you. And to be clear, it sounds like the transportation network, the roadway network as a whole has been considered. This isn't, we're not looking at it project by project. It's more of a global view of Lakewood Ranch and then the extensions off-site. Is that the takeaway from your summary?
For the most part, Schrader Manatee Ranch has been built under large developments of regional impact. The Northeast Quadrant did not fall under the DRI rule, but they did look at a collection of properties that they tentatively looked at as, I believe, a collection of 15 developable discrete development, individual developments, but they combined all of those together and analyzed their impacts together almost as if it were a DRI, set forth a mitigation program, and that's where the LDA came from and some of the on-site road construction that we're talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Roth.
How far east is 44th to go?
To what was formerly known as Dam Road is now Bourneside Road, so it's right out to the edge of our future development area boundary, and that's part of that network of roads that was being referenced earlier also.
Mr. Davis, you said it goes to the edge of development boundary. You're talking about within the comprehensive plan?
The future development area boundary as identified in the comp plan.
Thank
you. Basically the area, the east edge of where we intend to provide potable and wastewater utility service.
Right, the service area,
Yes,
urban
sir.
service area. Mr. Roth.
Can somebody explain what that 800-foot cul-de-sac needs an exception for? We don't normally do 800 feet of cul-de-sacs.
I'll allow staff to respond to that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, fellow commissioners. For the record, Thomas Gerstenberger, Public Works Department, I have been sworn. Right off the bat, I'd be remiss without mentioning our hopes and prayers are with the residents of South Carolina and North Carolina this morning with respect to Hurricane Florence. With respect to the question regarding the specific approval request, I have on the overhead and highlighted the particular cul-de-sac, which is over 800 feet, more particularly approximately 950 feet in total length. That would, as part of the process, does require specific approval. For this particular specific approval request, a mid-block eyebrow turnaround is being provided on this particular cul-de-sac. There are also a couple other locations of cul-de-sacs that are shown on this plan. This area in particular, where there are additional cul-de-sacs, however, there is a proposed emergency ingress-egress point to a driveway that's located on SMR property to the north. So the one particular location of the specific approval request is the highlighted cul-de-sac.
Thank you. In, with regard to the request for an exception on the 800-foot cul-de-sac, is that unusual? It seems like these requests come in rather frequently.
Mr. Chair, yes. Over the past couple of years, we have certainly had several projects that have come forward with cul-de-sac length specific approval requests. Those particular requests are reviewed through Public Works Department, Public Safety Department, and the agency having jurisdiction with respect to the fire district. With respect to cul-de-sac length, those are reviewed case-by-case basis. You'll see some cases, as this project is a prime example, where mitigation is in form of emergency access point, or you'll see, as shown on this particular case for the 950-foot length, that the mid-block turnaround is deemed appropriate as far as mitigation.
Right. So it's not an unusual request. I mean, it's not on every project, but it frequently comes in front of the commission. And it's typically, my understanding is typically a constraint on the land of, typically it's a habitat, a protected habitat, a wetland or something like that, that causes the need for a cul-de-sac to turn around.
Okay.
Is, to be clear, staff's reviewed this, and when I say staff, I include the fire emergency services, and they're okay with this particular
Mr. Chair, that
case?
is correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roth, is there any additional questions with regard to?
So I think what you're telling me is it allows the fire engine to get in as far as they need to go and also turn around. And in reference to the land, it obviously either there's something that would not permit us to put a street in because of a wetland or something similar. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a sidebar, is there consideration of changing the process since it is a frequent request?
I believe we're going to, with the LUC process improvements, have some additional discussion on that matter today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I knew the answer, so.
Good setup. Like a lawyer.
All right, very good. Any additional questions for staff?
Well, I just wanted to make one other comment, is
Mr.
that,
Rutledge.
again, I always like to clarify that this says a 50% reduction in allowable pre-development runoff. So this going in ultimately to the Bradenton River, this is kind of good for the water quality event, right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Rutledge, actually, this particular project is draining entirely into Mill Creek watershed. Mill Creek watershed does require a 50% reduction in the allowable rate of discharge.
So this is going to be better when it's done, right?
That is the,
Be the way I would describe it, right?
yes.
Thank you. All right. Any additional questions for the, for staff? Okay, seeing none. We'll allow the applicant a rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly on the cul-de-sac issue, we often have competing policies, as the chairman was explaining, with respect to impacting natural habitats, wetlands. We also have policies about limiting access to thoroughfare roadways. So all of those things are at play. And the additional thing we had on this project is a golf course. And so when you have a golf course using a large portion of this property, it affects the design of the remainder. What I did want to, if we could use the document camera, I think this could help us perhaps with some of the questions that Mr. Roth and Mr. Rutledge had about this northeast quadrant area. The project that you are considering right now is Residential Project A. This is State Road 64, State Road 70, Lorraine Road, as Mr. Davis mentioned, Bourneside Road, and the thoroughfares that we were discussing that will be constructed, the north-south E-Line Road from State Road 70 to State Road 64, 44th Avenue from Lorraine to Bourneside, Rangeland Boulevard from Lorraine Road to Bourneside. And so Rangeland and 44th also continue west throughout the remainder of the ranch, and then 44th, as we said, continuing farther. So I thought that visual might be helpful. And happy to answer any other questions. Don't really feel I have any rebuttal that we need to provide today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so the chair would consider a motion if no additional debate or discussion is warranted. Okay, we'll close the public hearing, and as I said, the chair will consider a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Dillesline.
I move to recommend approval of PDR 17-34ZG as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Rhodes, second. Is there any discussion or debate, deliberation? Seeing none, the chair is going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. All right, we're going to move on to item number 7. Item number 7, I have to recuse myself, so I'm going to turn over the gavel to Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes.
Ms. Tusing, good morning.
Morning.
Would you please read into the record item number 7?
Yes, sir, I will. This is item number 7, PDR 1735ZG, SMR Northeast LLC, the Woodlands at Lakewood Ranch. Another quasi-judicial hearing, and Rosina Leiter is the planner. And this property is located immediately to the south of the one that you just reviewed, the 1,000, south of 44th. This is a rezone of approximately 545 acres, generally located east of Lorraine Road and north of State Road 70, and 1.5 miles south of State Road 64 east at 4715 and 4821 Lorraine Road, 4897 Post Boulevard, and 5010 Uline Road. And it's being rezoned from General Agriculture Watershed Protection Ever Special Treatment Overlay District to Plan Development Residential Watershed Protection Evers and Special Treatment Overlay District. That's a lot to say. And approving a general development plan for a large project for 1,500 single-family residential units, which will consist of detached, semi-detached, and attached units. And there's an option to have a personal wireless facility also located on the site. And Rosina's here to give a brief presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Leidner, please.
Good morning again, Rosina Leiter by the staff, and I have been sworn. The applicant is asking the rezone 545 acres from A to PDR, and the proposal is for 1,500 single-family units that could be single-family detached, attached, and semi-detached. The majority of the site is with the MUCR, Future Land Use category, and there are 2 portions with MUC3 and MUC1. The site is partially with the watershed and the special treatment, and the application complies with all the regulations of the Land Development Code and the Comprehensive Plan, and the applicant is asking a specific approval to exceed the length of 2 cul-de-sacs and provide mitigation in one case, mid-turn, and in the other case, emergency access. If you have any particular question, I can answer any question, and we recommend approval. And it's part of the component that the applicant was talking about before. This site is south of the case that you see previously, and it's going to be bound to the south for range land and to the north for the 44th Avenue East.
Commissioners, any questions for staff
No,
at this
sir.
point? Nope. All right, thank you. Applicant comment? Or, no, passing? Okay. Back to the commission. Any questions or concerns at all, since this,
Mr. Chairman?
yes, Mr. Dudley?
Comment. There are some comments from the school district regarding the needs for 2 elementary schools, a middle school, and half of a high school. I just want the commission to understand that we have been in the process of acquiring those sites. They did not come to you. They went to the county commission, the approval of the sites. So at this time, we've completed all of our due diligence for a high school site and for a K-8 site. And we anticipate closing on those after all the roads and water and sewer that Clark Davis showed you a while ago. After all those improvements are in, we will close on those sites. So SMR has worked with us very well on that. We are also in the process of discussing an additional elementary school site, and again, that process is going smoothly, so I just wanted you to understand that those comments in the staff report have been or are being addressed.
Okay. Thank you, because I was going to ask that question of you, especially since you're here today. Thank you. Commissioners, any other comments of any kind? Nope. All right. Ms. Leidner, any final comments from staff?
No, at this time, unless you have any particular question.
Okay. And before I forget, any comments from the public? Opening it up for comment? Nobody coming forward, closing public comment. Thank you. Okay. Back to staff. Do we have recommendation of any kind? From commissioners
I move that we
on item number
accept
7? We have a second?
Second.
Mr. Ram, thank you. All in favor of the approval of the motion on item number 7? Aye, please.
Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you.
Oh, you're coming back
Mr.
now.
Connolly's coming back for our chairmanship right now.
Thank you. Again, receiving the chairmanship. Thank you. All right, all right. Let's see. We have a little bit of time before our time's certain, so we'll go ahead and go through item number 8. So, Ms. Tusing, could you please read item number 8 into the record?
Yes, this is PDMU 1802ZG. It's Connor DePizio Irrevocable Trust, Fort Hamer Senior Living. It is a quasi-judicial hearing, and Ryan Todd is the planner. This is a rezone of an approximately 15-acre site, which is generally located 660 feet north of the intersection of Mulholland Road and Fort Hamer. And it's commonly known as 2605 and 2705 Fort Hamer Road in Parrish. It is being rezoned from general agriculture North Central overlay to the PDMU North Central overlay mixed use, PDMU mixed use, geez. It's retaining the North Central Overlay District, and it's approving a general development plan for an assisted living and memory care facility serving up to 179 residents, and office uses totaling 42,500 square feet. And Ryan is here to probably give a better presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tusing. For the record, my name is Ryan Todd, and I'm a planner with Manatee County, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
So Commissioners, as you're more than aware at this point, comprehensive plan forces applicants into plan development, which is why you see these 3 requests for special approval. The first to allow mixed use within the urban fringe 3 future land use category. Second to allow greater than 1 dwelling unit per acre density within the UF3 future land use category. And the other to exceed Was it 30,000 square feet of office commercial space in the urban French-free future land use category. Just to familiarize yourselves with the area, if you aren't already, this is from 3,500 feet above ground level. The site is here. Immediately across Fort Hamer Road is a PDMU zone district, which is Travis 55, which is approximately 177 single-family residences with 30,000 square feet of retail programmed for the intersection of Mulholland Road and Fort Hamer. And then you have a school campus to the north, an elementary school, which is relatively the same size as the proposal to show the compatibility there along Fort Hamer. This is 950 feet AGL. This is the site plan, or excuse me, general development plan. The ALF and memory care facilities are on the northern half of the site, indicated here. Complementary office uses are located on the south, and the buildings have been designed so to provide screening to the surface parking area from adjacent residential areas to mitigate any concern over lighting, traffic, and noise. The northern elevation, this is looking south from Fort Hamer. You see a uniform building setback. And here, the southern elevation, you can see what the development will look like, to the single-family residences to the south. We did receive one phone call from a member of the public concerned about light from the parking lot. But again, this general development plan has been programmed as such to use buildings and facades to mitigate any of those types of impacts. And gentlemen, I would like to add that this is an exemplar general development plan within the NCO. The applicant is requesting no specific approvals for any relief or alteration to the code or the North Central Overlay District. The person that did call about the parking lot was also concerned about height. But within the NCO Overlay District, it has the most stringent building and massing and height limitations in the county. There's a complicated formula to determine allowable building height within the NCO, and this general development plan meets those standards. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Question.
Mr. Roth.
So the 42,500 square feet of general office will be open to the general public for health services, not just the assisted living or senior living group?
I do not know the specifics of the tenants there, but the applicant is here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay.
All right, we'll see if the applicant would like to clarify that. Is there any other questions for staff? Mr. Rutledge.
Mr. Todd, can you give me the actual height anticipated for this and how many stories that would include?
The maximum height, sir, is 35 feet, and that is this building here with this interior courtyard, which is over 100 feet from the road surface area. I believe it's actually about 150 feet, and that's 3 stories.
And is the elementary school up the street single story?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's single, but it's
Not
large bulk.
high, right?
Yeah, it's bulk, yeah.
That was kind of my question, is because gymnasium and some of that stuff, I'm just curious what the height was on that product out there.
It is single story, but I don't know the exact height.
Well, Mr. Todd's provided the max. Well, I'm sure the applicant can give a more specific detail with regard to the intent on the height, so we can have some comparison with regard to this.
Yeah, so since you asked the question, Mr. Rutledge, this building here is 24 feet, and then it steps up to 35 feet. So 24 feet with 2 stories, 35 feet with 3. This building is also 35 feet. However, there is parking underneath, so it's 2 stories with parking underneath. This building is 24 feet, 15 feet, 24, 15, 24.
Very good. All right, thank you. Mr. Todd, in the past, I recall seeing applications come forward that had conditions or stipulations regarding lighting. I believe the reason we don't see something like that in this particular application is it's been adopted into the code. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
we don't stip code, so.
Right. So the point being, it's something that's required by code. This is compliant with the code, therefore it's complying with the lighting requirement. So
That's correct.
just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Like I said, in the past, we have seen conditional conditions related to lighting. So thank you. All right. Mr. Roth.
So there's no traffic impact, well, there's a traffic study done by Morris Engineering that says there's an adverse impact on the road. It will obviously affect the road in the location with new buildings across the way, Mulholland and so forth. When does that get submitted? Does it go to Board of County Commissioners or? Did I lose you somewhere?
No, we're waiting for traffic.
Good morning. For the record, Clark Davis, Transportation Planning Division Manager. The traffic study submitted had an estimated impact of 121 p.m. peak hour trip-ins associated with the combination of ALF and office. I had the study up a minute ago. I'll need to fetch it again. I don't recall it saying that there were adverse impacts, maybe significant impacts. I thought the finding was that this road would continue to operate at level of service D. As a sort of estimated condition, the applicant chose to defer a final finding of concurrency at this stage. So with their final site plan, they'll do an updated study, and if there are impacts, they'll identify what that mitigation is and
that would
take
come
action
before the Board of County Commissioners rather than us?
The concurrency, when they defer to final site plan, it's an administrative process. It's done during the final site plan and construction plan stage. They typically submit those together with a traffic study.
Mr. Davis, with regard to the typical process or what's required, there's an opportunity for the applicant to get concurrency through the rezone process. Is that correct?
When a property is being rezoned, there must be some determination as to whether or not the proposed land uses can generate more trips than the adopted the proposed zoning can generate more trips than the adopted zoning, and to establish whether or not we think that those may or may be adverse. At the zoning stage, we do not issue concurrency findings. At the preliminary site plan, that's for most developments the earliest stage at which they can request what we call a certificate of level of service compliance. It's concurrency findings. We get a mixture. Some will defer at that stage. Some will go ahead and do the study and get their certificate. At the latest that it can be done for the types of developments you see here is final site plan stage.
So this study done by whoever is not the final study to be submitted for road impact?
Right. So connecting that to the previous question, because they're rezoning it and they've submitted a preliminary site plan, we've got two things. We've got a rezoning that prompts us detecting whether or not it looks like there's going to be an increase in traffic. It's a preliminary site plan, so we have some definition of what they're going to do, and so we don't have to speculate quite as much. So we get what we think is a pretty good estimate of what their traffic impacts are going to be, but we don't take it all the way to its final conclusion of determining exactly what any mitigation will need to be. That is something that will be done in an administrative step, in this case, the final site plan.
And when we say administrative, that's a technical review of information provided and an actual determination of concurrency. That's when the final decision is made, correct?
Yes, it's a formal site plan review process by the Development Review Committee. My division looks at the traffic studies and makes those findings.
Okay.
By the developer. And then after the developer develops the plan, then the administrative staff examines it to see whether it jives with the real world?
When I say administrative, it doesn't necessarily mean that it gets done, say, in the county administrator's office. It just means it's done at a staff level as opposed to taking it into the public hearing process to have it done. It's reviewed with the same scrutiny as the traffic studies that we bring to you when people request traffic studies. It just doesn't come before an appointed or elected body of officials for final review and approval. It's reviewed purely at a staff level. The traffic study, if mitigation is found to be necessary, has to be implemented prior to or concurrent with development of the property. If it's an off-site impact, they have an opportunity to mitigate it through what they call a proportionate share payment process, but that mitigation still must be provided before they can get their final site plan approved.
Mr. Davis, I know that this is a kind of a getting in maybe a little too much detail, but it's my understanding that the process, the traffic analysis process, there's a lot of coordination with the county, utilizing the county's the methodology has to be discussed and accepted by the county before the analysis is done, but also the county provides the adopted levels of service if it's a county road, and I think sometimes the traffic count that could then be verified by the applicant. But there's a lot of interaction and coordination with the county all along the process. Is that correct?
It is somewhat dependent on the scale of the study, but there is that coordination from beginning to end, starting with, sometimes it's more of an informal sort of study parameters type discussion, but as the project gets bigger, and this one's getting near a threshold where it qualifies as bigger, they have what they call a formal methodology statement where they set forth the parameters, they talk about data sources, and reach agreement on those kinds of things. So I think that's
Right.
what you're referencing.
Right, I'm just trying to make sure I understand, and for the benefit of the board, that it's not just an application submitted and then comment and response. It's more of an interactive process, and I think all along with the rezone, with the application for development, so there's a better understanding of the network, the traffic network as a whole, and it's not viewed just project by project and road frontage by road frontage.
I would say that's generally true.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Any additional questions for staff? Okay, thank you. Where are we in the process? Have we had public comment? Have we had? Okay, I think the applicant has the opportunity. These are all blurring together, so.
More coffee.
Good morning.
Good morning. I have not been sworn. So.
Okay. All right. I think if you intend to speak today for a quasi-judicial item, if you would please rise to be sworn in.
Do you swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present to the planning commission will be truthful and accurate?
I do.
Very good. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Greg Wall. I'm a local architect, Sarasota local architect, and then I'm the applicant's representative. The plans that you see have been prepared by me, my staff, and I, and we've been working pretty closely with Ryan over the last few months for same. The reason this property was selected was originally as a business decision because of the fact that there aren't ALFs close by. They sort of take a 5-mile look at potential property. They take a 5-mile circle and say, are there ALFs similar to ours that are going to be developed here or are developed? And we determined that there was a need for this. In Sarasota County right now, pardon me, I'm speaking of Sarasota since that's my home base, we have 5% of the beds that they consider necessary for ALF assisted living over 65 years old. There's a high demand. We assume there's a high demand here. And we feel like with this particular property in this location, it would be a positive addition to the neighborhood. The development of this property started essentially with the 10-acre piece of property, because that's our model to do an ALF campus. You've seen ALS before, and magically they're about a 5-acre parcel. They sort of start with 5 acres for a single building or a large building, and then they go to another 5 acres if they want to develop a campus, which is what we're intending to do. I'm representing the John DePizzo Trust, the family trust, headed by Jack DePizzo. He lives in Sarasota and in Canfield, Ohio. He has an impeccable reputation. He has several developments in Florida. He has several developments in Ohio, and he has recently finished, as of this week, as a matter of fact, the Aravilla development on Proctor Road in Sarasota County to understand the quality of the developments he presents. There was a question regarding the development to the south, the 5 acres that was parceled with this when Mr. DePizzo approached the homeowner, the property owners. This is not only is it supportive in the urban fringe to have supportive suburban facilities, but this is also not a selfless act. When we develop an ALF, we like to be very close to a medical complex. We're doing a property in South Sarasota County right now that's right across the street from the Sarasota Memorial's Osprey office building. That's a very positive thing for us. Our intention is with this site is to actually, with the front building here, is to actually develop that as a walk-in clinic. The closest walk-in clinics we found are probably 10 to 15 minutes away, and they're not truly walk-in clinics because essentially they're general practitioners that accept walk-in patients. This walk-in clinic will probably have slightly extended hours, and we're hoping, if possible, to tie it in with one of the local hospitals because it gives us a little more gravitas and it kind of gives us a little bit higher level of service. The other buildings surrounding that, we're intending to have our tenants intended to be on anything that supports a senior community, oncologist, geriatric medicine, prosthetics, periodontist, dentist, et cetera, and these will absolutely be open to the public. The nature of our site, with it going back to the ALF, it's a very quiet development. If you've been around ALFs, they're very innocuous. Essentially, we have our population. The front buildings are usually inhabited by 80 to 90-year-olds, and the back building would probably be 70 to 80s. It's a little more independent in the back. Our clients in the front do not drive. Our clients in the back have the ability to drive and have the right to drive, but in our studies, or our experience, I should say, about 30% of the folks drive in the back. When my parents went into independent living, they had stopped driving, and that's sort of a signal for them for the transition into this environment. As far as the setbacks go, we're approximately 100 feet back from the property line in the front. We have a 20-foot barrier buffer all the way around the building, and we're also going to have a buffer between the two developments, the ALF and the office facility. And regarding the lighting, we are very, very specific on lighting. As you know now, the lighting is tied into the energy code, so it's not just a matter of light that's emitting on the surface. We also have to verify the lumens. We cannot spill light on adjacent properties. And in our estimation, there will be no light pollution from our site based upon what we had to adhere to in the code.
And can you confirm the proposed height of the building? Are you that far along in the design?
No, sir, but I can tell you we're doing a very similar thing right now in Sarasota.
Okay.
The front of the building is, of the ALF, is 2 stories. It'll be approximately 24, 25 feet. The second building, which has a third level, is 35 feet, and the building in the back is 2 stories over parking. It is 35 feet tall.
Okay.
And the other buildings, I think, Ryan, were 24 2 stories and 15 1 story.
Okay, so it's a mix of heights throughout the campus. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any additional questions for the applicant?
Just a comment.
Yes, sir.
Williams Elementary School that you were referencing earlier, that is 2-story.
Oh, it is 2-story. Okay, thank you. I'm sure there's not an impact with the ALF. We're not going to have a.
We expect no demand for the elementary, Williams Elementary from our building.
They're kind of rowdy folks down there. But, I think we can adjust.
All right, thank you. Very good. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right. Mr. Hall.
Mr. Wall?
Or Wall, I'm sorry. Hall, Wall, they're both things that are associated with architects. All right, very good. I think we're to the public comment portion of the hearing, so is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this matter, on this application? Anyone at all?
Did the abutters not get a notice?
All right, that's why it's presentation upon request. So we're going to go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing, and is there any closing comment from staff? Oh, I was looking in the wrong direction.
I have no further comment, Chair.
Thank you.
Let me say I have nothing to say.
Does the applicant wish to rebut his no further comment? All right. So the chair will close the public hearing, and the chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ron.
I move to recommend approval of PDMU 1802ZG as recommended by staff.
Very good. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. DeLesline. We have a motion and a second. Is there any deliberation?
I do think there's an underservicing. You know, I've recently had put my mother in a facility. I think we're well underserved for this. So I like seeing this in our community because I do think it lets people stay and brings communities together, families and so forth. So I'm kind of a fan of when it's done right. So.
I agree. Yep. Very good. All right, the chair's going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. So
Oh, right on time.
10 o'clock.
This is why you're the chair.
10:13, 14 now.
You want to break?
So are you requesting a recess? Okay, very good. So we do have a time certain item on the agenda, so we're going to have to.
5 minutes.
Good. Is it okay if we take 5? Okay, very good. We'll take 5 and set up. We'll set up the lighting and the fog machines.
And the music.
All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. All right. Go ahead and call the meeting back from recess. Is it adjourned? No, it's not adjourned.
Back from the plate.
Back to order.
Back to order. Thank you. It's like a walking Robert's Rule of Orders. All right. So we do have a item on the agenda because it was advertised. We have to maintain the time certain element with regard to this one. So the first item, the time certain item is item number 10. So Ms. Tusing, can you please read item number 10 into the record?
Yes, sir. Item number 10 is Land Development Code Text Amendment 1705, Ordinance 1803. It is a text amendment for process improvements. The amendments are to chapters and sections of the Land Development Code as outlined in our staff report and ordinance title. The amendments include, and the purpose of the amendments is to implement the comprehensive plan that we recently adopted on August 23rd, and we anticipate the effective date of that being October 1st. And these Land Development Code amendments revise, delete, and add to Chapter 1, which is the General Provisions chapter, Chapter 2, Definitions, Chapter 3, Review and Authority Procedures, Chapter 4, Zoning, Chapter 5, Standards for Accessory and Specific Uses and Structures, Chapter 6, Signs, which is some minor amendments, Chapter 7, Environmental and Cultural Resource Protection, Chapter 8, Engineering, Design, and Utilities, Chapter 9, which is Design and Guidelines, and Chapter 10, Transportation Management. The revisions to Chapter 6 are very minor. They are proposing the changeable copy sign section only, which was requested by the Board of County Commissioners at a previous meeting. Substantive amendments to Chapter 6 are pending and will be processed separately, a separate ordinance, and at future public hearings. And there are no changes proposed to the Airport Impact Overlay District with this request. Various LDC sections regarding the Airport Impact Overlay District are pending and will be processed as a separate ordinance, and which will also be heard at future date. The request before you today is for the Planning Commission to recommend for a recommendation of approval of the Land Development Code text amendments. This is county initiated. Is this judicial or legislative? Legislative. Thank you. And it is a legislative matter. These amendments have two main objectives. The first is to clarify the function of the plan versus the Land Development Code. The plan is the broad policy direction of the county, and the Land Development Code is the implementation through regulations of the plan. And the second objective is to provide opportunities for compact development, affordable housing options, and services near residential communities. The main subject areas are that we are deleting the special approval requirement, and it will be processed through different processes, either an administrative process, because we have the regulations within the Land Development Code, or special permit, or you would do it through the Plan Development District, depending upon what the specific issue is. And then also we are trying to rely more on the Land Development Code regulations, which are even either existing regulations within the code or we're adding new regulations to address those special approvals. Also, plan development, we are trying to be less reliant on the plan development zoning districts. It is still optional that you can do that, and in some cases, it will still be required to rezone to plan development. For instance, anytime there's an overriding public benefit or interest would have to be determined by the board. We are also adding clustering provisions for the conservation of lands, and we're also including some straight zoning districts to accommodate the densities within the future land use categories. Those new zoning districts are MX, RSF9, RMF 12, and 16. We also have added affordable housing initiatives, which include density bonuses for projects with 25% affordable housing and standard zoning, not requiring people to rezone to plan development with a land use restriction agreement. And we're also proposing to increase densities and intensities and to provide incentives for mixed-use projects at activity nodes. And the implementation of the future land use map through zoning. Again, less specifics as we made our amendments to the comprehensive plan. We took some of the regulatory portions of that out because they exist within the land development code and rely more on our use tables within the land development code. We hope that it will be less confusion. We don't know if that's going to be true, but we're hoping. And also makes, again, to have the broad policy in the plan and to have the specific details within the land development code. Pat Tajewski is here, and she will give the presentation in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Pat Tajewski with SNME, and we have a PowerPoint. There's going to be a little bit of repetition with what Margaret said, and also a little bit of repetition from what you have heard me say not too long ago. And it's because we're going through the process. We finished with the comprehensive plan. Now this is the land development portion of it. So we have been calling this process improvements because most of the changes are related to that special approval process that we have had in place, and also the requirements to go through plan development. But in reality, it affects a lot of different issues in the county, like, for example, the provision of affordable housing, the ability to do clustering, and the ability to create activity nodes. So the bottom line of all these changes is to make sure that the comprehensive plan and the land development code work together and not as two separate documents. So in terms of the background, we have been working on changes to the land development code for since probably 2015. People feel that, we just keep going on and on and on and things are not getting done, but things have been getting done and finalized. So when we did the reorganization, it was just that reorganization, but we knew that there were certain areas that we needed to address. So in 2016, we did that first phase, and it was just for the urban corridors, just the urban core of the county. Those were adopted, they're in place, development is being reviewed based on those standards. Now, this phase that we're working on is what we call the process improvements phase, and the comprehensive plan was adopted August 23rd by the board. So that's why now this is the first hearing on the land development code portion of the project. So this is where we're implementing those changes that were made to the comp plan. As I mentioned, it was affordable housing, activity nodes, and clustering, and the future land use map, zoning map. In terms of special approval, this was a process that was established back when the comprehensive plan was rewritten in 1989. And the idea was to take certain types of development through different types of review. Special approval didn't necessarily mean that everything had to go through the board. Sometimes staff was doing the special approval, sometimes it was the board. But in Chapter 3 of the Land Development Code, we have a table that spells out every single application that would need that special approval. We found over 50 different development types that we have to go through that process. By deleting that table doesn't mean that everything is going to be approved by right from now on. What it means is that we took one by one and analyzed them to see, could this be approved based on the regulations that we have today? If yes, then leave it as an administrative approval. Does it need some type of oversight by anybody else, like the Planning Commission or hearing officer or the board? Then let's spell it out that way. So we took special care to make sure that we were not letting anything fall through the cracks. So in summary, basically, these were the major issues from that 50-some item table. We have been requiring that anytime you do mixed use, anytime, you would have to go through special approval. Mixed use is something that we want happening in the county. We have proven that it is necessary for people to be able to walk to places, to drive short distances instead of having to drive miles to get something. So we have massaged the zoning districts to make sure that we spell out what happens when you're going to do mixed use. As long as all the uses that you're proposing are allowed in your zoning classification, then it should be okay. So now the tables specify, okay, so if you're putting a commercial use, what would the setbacks be? If you're adding a residential use, then how would you measure density, intensity, and all that? The plan specifies that if you exceed a certain density, you would have to go through special approval. But it's a situation where if the plan says your land use category allows 3 dwelling units per acre, but if you're going to do more than one, then you have to go through special approval. The way that land use categories work is that you establish a land use category with, let's say, a maximum of 3, but then you establish zoning districts. And those zoning districts, you have a variety to pick from, because not every single site that is classified as 3 is eligible for 3. But then you take care of that when you go through the rezoning process. So somebody comes in and says, I have residential 16, I can do 16 dwelling units per acre, but they are right next to agriculture and right next to, maybe a type of use that would not be okay with 16 dwelling units per acre. When the board looks at it, they may have a recommendation that, no, maybe the most appropriate density in that place is 6 for now. In the future, that's why it's called the future land use map, the future land use category, they may be able to go to 16, but maybe at this time they cannot. So it can be addressed through zoning, not necessarily special approval. In terms of the overlays, anything that happened within an overlay district would have to go through special approval. We have regulations that have been established since that time for the different overlays, and there was one that we didn't have standards for, the Peace River overlay. Well, we have lumped that one in with the other 2. So now they all have standards. So it's not like staff would say, should it be, would this be a good idea here or not? No. They look at the standards. If they meet all the standards, then they would, be approved or denied. Now we still have some language in the comprehensive plan and the land development code that says something like the board may waive certain requirements because of an overriding public interest. That is still there, and we're still going to send those to the board. Other examples, we used to send everything that was within the 25-year floodplain through the board. We have standards in the code. There are standards the state has. The development will still have to meet those standards, so there was no need to do a special approval. Perennial lakes or streams, there have been talk in the town about, are we just letting them build next to the perennial streams without any regulations? No, we have regulations. We have setback standards, so those will be enforced. Clustering is something else that we want to encourage because we want development to stay away from environmentally sensitive areas, and it is a good solution. You can still do your development, but make sure it stays away from those areas. So instead of asking people to jump through the hoops to get something like that approved, we're establishing standards. So we have specific standards as to, how dense you can get, your height, your density, your setbacks, all that will be spelled out in the land development code. Other examples, we do have some land use categories that are unique, like the AT attraction land use category, and they require plan development and special approval. We feel that just plan development will do the trick. It will send it through the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners, so there was no need to do duplicate reviews. We had others that didn't really make a lot of sense, like expanding a future land use category. All expansions of all future land use categories go through the process anyway, so we didn't need to say that. Same thing with the expansion of an existing use. We have a whole chapter in the Land Development Code that talks about if you have a non-conforming use, what can you do with it? So we didn't have to send them through a special approval process. There is another one that has to do with the central sewer system, and I'm going to talk about that one in detail later. And also compatibility issues. We have buffer standards, we have compatibility requirements that we're adding to the land development code, so we will be able to address that with regulations instead of just public hearings. So I want to talk a little bit about the sewer connection issue. So right now we have a policy that says that anything that is within the service area, so it's anything other than the yellow, would be required to connect to the central system. But we know that sometimes those lines are pretty far from the development site. So how does it work today? So right now it says that you could get an administrative waiver from connecting if you're doing less than 5 lots or 5 or less lots. If the connection to the central system is going to cost more than $60,000, more than what it would cost to provide the septic system. Now, that $60,000 figure was added long time ago. $60,000, it's, back in 1989 would have taken you, let's say, 1 mile from the site. Today it could be a quarter mile. So it's something that we always avoid putting dollar figures in the land development code for that reason, because times change. The other requirement was that the septic tank treatment would have to meet Department of Health standards. That doesn't sound like a condition to me because everybody has to meet those standards. The other one had to do with a setback from outstanding Florida waters, and that makes sense. All septic should, do that. And the other one had to do with the water protection overlays, also a setback. And then the last one would be not being within a flooding area. Now, if you didn't meet any of those conditions, then you will have to go to the board and ask them, is it okay to, get a waiver from connecting? So what we would like to do is change that system a little bit so that we're more consistent with what the state requires. So we talked about how in Manatee County, anybody who's within the service area, so anybody within the urban area pretty much. The state uses availability. Availability means, and it's not a definition that I can say it's quarter mile. No, it all depends on the type of development you're doing, but it says if you're within a quarter mile from the system, you need to connect, you shall connect. So we're saying maybe we can have a 2-tier process where we say, okay, so development is coming in, they're proposing, and they come in and say, we cannot connect. So staff looks at it and see, okay, are you within the available range as defined in the state statutes? Yes, we're within that range. It's like, sorry, you need to connect. Now, you're outside that range. Then there is a second process to that. And then in that case, they would go through the waiver process, but then there are more specific criteria that they would have to meet. We're getting rid of the $60,000 because that one doesn't really make sense. But we're saying, you need to make sure that you're meeting the standards for setbacks and from outstanding Florida waters and water protection districts. But it would be a way to provide relief when we know that, for example, there is an entire subdivision on the way, and they would have to run the lines all the way around the subdivision. So it would be based on something that makes logical sense rather than just a $60,000 waiver for everybody. In terms of plan development, so right now, the comp plan and the land development code require PD for a number of different activities, including the ones that I mentioned, mixed uses, doing higher densities and intensities, and preservation of natural features. So we're trying to clean up that section a little bit and still require PD for certain activities, but not for all of them. And also, PD will always be a voluntary process. Somebody wants to come in and do PD, they can still do it. I have shown this map before that shows that almost half of the urban part of the county has turned into a PD, and that's because the county has been requiring it. So we want to minimize that. Just like we did for special approval, we went through, one by one through all the different requirements to go through PD and ask the question, is it worth sending them through PD? Is it going to do anything different than going through regular zoning? And then we provided recommendations based on that. And most of them are pretty similar. If you're going to do clustering, if you're going to do affordable housing, if you're going to go above certain densities and intensities, boom, PD. In terms of affordable housing, so we have plenty of policies in the comp plan saying we have to help with the affordable housing provision. We're not, the county cannot go and provide the housing for people who need it, but at least we can set up the regulations in a way that developers can help with that, with the provision of affordable housing. So with that in mind, we looked at the system today. We do offer some bonuses today for affordable housing, but we felt that they were a little bit difficult to enforce. Like, for example, it says you can bump up to the next land use category. When you look at your list of land use categories, they're not as continuous as you would think. You know, my RSF1, fine, 3, fine, 4.5, okay, but then you have things like mixed use. Where does mixed use go? And what if I'm already at the residential 16? What is the next one? It's commercial, but there's no density in commercial. So we decided that it would be better to create a table that says if you're within this land use category, this is your density, and these are the zoning districts that you could request when you're going to go for your bonus. Now, when I say the zoning districts that you could request, in the past, they would have to go through PD. So PD, what that means is that they look at the property, and before they know what they can do on that property, they have to go through a process of almost designing the site to figure out, what it's going to look like, how many units they're going to put in, and then go through the plan development process, public hearings, a lot of money up front. Several months later, they may get the news that, nope, it's denied because something happened, the public was in uproar or something. So it's a very unpredictable path for people who want to provide affordable housing. So the way we're proposing it is that they could do affordable housing at those densities within a regular zoning district, a standard zoning district. Now, they still have to go through a public hearing process because to rezone property, you have to go through the Planning Commission and the board. So it's an opportunity for people to come in and comment. But at this point, they have not gone through the expense of preparing plans for the whole development. At this point, all they want to know is that we can do 9 dwelling units per acre. So that's what the board and the Planning Commission would be approving, a maximum density. What is it going to look like? Oh, we go to the zoning chapter and we say, oh, those are the setbacks. Oh, if they do more than so many stories, that means they have to go back. Okay, so if I have a single-family home next door, I know I'm not going to have any height within so many feet. So all those things would be spelled out in the land development code.
Our properties, our properties that are currently zoned, they have the ability to go through the public hearing process to get the density?
If they have the right zoning, no, they wouldn't have to do that.
By right, they're granted that density?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So following that, is there any chance on that, following what the chairman just said, on public input? If it meets all the criteria, does it still get a hearing to hear what the public may say?
No, in that case, they have the zoning already, so they can do that density. And what they do have to do is meet all the standards that are in the land development code. So we have specific standards for affordable housing that would say just because we know we're going to have higher densities, then the setbacks are going to be different and the height is going to be different.
Okay, but sometimes in the past, I agree with the change, but sometimes over the past many years, we've had an uproar on where affordable housing might be,
Yes.
good or bad, depending on how they read into what it's going to be. Is that opportunity going to still be there or not? It sounds
Only
like
if
it
they're
goes away.
rezoning. When they do the rezoning, that's when they would have to go through the public hearing process. So most sites that we have in the county, we don't have a lot of residential 16s. And this is something that I was going to get into later on. But right now, we don't have some zoning districts that would get you up to that density. Those zoning districts don't exist in the county. So from now on, anybody who wants to do one of those zoning districts, they would have to rezone. So right now, I believe the highest density that we have in the land development code, it's 9. We don't allow 12 or 16 by right. So any new ones would have to come through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask, when you say mixed use, where you get this credit, can you define mixed use in your terms?
Right now, this is just affordable housing. I'm going to get to the mixed use in just a
Well,
minute.
the reason why is because the affordable housing, in a lot of cases, would be critical to a good mixed-use project. And so my question is, to get to these densities, have you already figured out how they're intertwined? Because when you say mixed use, it might be multi-use.
In this case, it's just for residential. they don't have to do mixed use to get these densities, because this is just for affordable housing. We do have some bonuses for mixed use, but they don't have to have affordable
This
housing.
is strictly if you rezone for affordable housing?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha, thanks.
Now, when we talk about they still have to go through the process for rezoning, we have specific criteria in the Land Development Code that say if anybody's going to come and ask for a rezoning, what are we going to look at? We have to look at compatibility with existing development nearby. We have to look at availability of public facilities, schools, transportation, all the typical things. We have to look at consistency with the development patterns in the area. We have to look at to see if it is a logical expansion of that zoning district. And we have to look at environmental impacts. And we also have to look at what are the typical uses that would be allowed in that district. So all those issues get reviewed at that point. Okay, so clustering, we have talked about this before. The comprehensive plan encourages clustering, but requires you to go through PD to do this. This is an example that we have shown before where on the left is a subdivision that has been built already, but we looked at an old aerial. So it's the one on the right. And that area with the green line around it used to be a wooded area. So if these two subdivisions had been owned by the same person, same developer, they could have come in and preserve that open space and put the same number of lots to the right. So what that means is that the lots would have reduced dimensions, so smaller lots. So this portion of the site would have a higher density, but when you look at the site, the overall site, the density would still meet code and still meet the comp plan. So it's a way of designing your development where you just concentrate the density where the uplands are, where it makes more sense to have that density. So what we're proposing in this case, and when we changed the comp plan, we just said no special approval or PD necessary, period. Now that we're in the Land Development Code, now we can get into the regulations. And this is where we specify, is this going to be a permitted use or a conditional use? And we're proposing it as a permitted use because we have standards. So we have standards in terms of location, density, development size, minimum lot size, setbacks, compatibility, and open space requirements. And the question has come up as to, can you do that east of the future development boundary line? The comp plan today says you can. What we are doing is, if you are in A district, agricultural district, or A1 district, we're saying you still have to have a minimum lot size of, I believe it's, can't read from here, but it's 1 acre. All the other districts, we go 50% of whatever the code requires today. Now, activity nodes. Now is where we get into the mixed use part of it. So you have had.
I'm sorry, before you move off clustering, is there, it only applies to agricultural zoning? There's no opportunity to do?
Any zoning district.
Any zoning, okay.
The reason why I mentioned agriculture is because if you're in an agricultural area, don't expect to see tiny lots. We're still trying to preserve the character of that agricultural area by restricting the size to just 1 acre. All the other zoning districts, if the zoning district requires, I don't know, a 40,000 square foot lot or something like that, you could go down to 20,000, provided that all these other conditions are met.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So you have a system in the comprehensive plan that talks about commercial locational criteria. So what that was intended to do was to make sure that we give the opportunity to developers to put retail and services close to residential. So if you have the appropriate intersection, two arterials or an arterial and a collector, depending on the surrounding area, you could do like a convenience store or maybe a medium-sized commercial development or maybe a whole shopping center with a grocery store and all that. So that criteria is still there. We're not changing those standards. But in the past, to do that, you had to go through special approval and plan development. So we're trying to figure out how to change it so that it starts working, so we start seeing more of these nodes. The first thing that we wanted to do was change the name from commercial locational criteria to activity nodes, because we feel that the idea is not just to provide a convenience store at the corner, but maybe it is a mixed-use development. Start talking about maybe the corner store with a multifamily above, or a combination of different uses. So in order to do that, we went along with the definition of the comp plan that talks about the small, medium, and large. And the comprehensive plan already tells you where you can have small or medium or large. And then we created a column that says, based on that, you could do an activity node within these different districts. So typically it's going to be like the general commercial or the professional residential or what's the other one? Small commercial zoning districts. So the way that this would work, it's similar to what I was talking about affordable housing before, that people wouldn't have to come in with all their plans drawn up to the T to get approval or denial. In this case, if you're going to go with this zoning district, meet the criteria or the standards of that zoning district. These are your setbacks, this is your height, and how many square feet you can do on that site. All that is already in the code. So as long as they meet that, they go through their rezoning, and again, this is where they would come to the public forum, and this is where the neighbors could come in and say, yes, it makes sense to have a convenience store at the corner, or maybe not. We don't want any residential in this area. So, thank you. So, and that would be the public hearing opportunity in that case. But when it comes to the details as to where the parking is going to go, where the landscaping is going to be provided, all that would have to meet code. And it would not be a negotiated process like it is with the PD. It's, you just meet code. Now, somebody wants to do PD with that, they're still welcome to do PD. They can still come and request that. Again, if you go through a rezoning, you go through the same criteria that I mentioned before: compatibility, availability of public services, consistency with development patterns, logical expansion, and environmental impacts. Now, you asked a question before as to how are we defining mixed use? Because we have seen in certain communities where they will build a multifamily development and say, we have mixed use because we have a gym. And you say, well, is that open to the public? No, it's just for the residents. That's not mixed use. So we're defining it as, and I don't have the specific details, but we're saying that if you're going to include commercial, it has to be either a percentage of your site or at a minimum a 3,500 square foot space. So that's like a corner store. If you're going to do a whole commercial development and you're saying, yes, we have a janitor's suite in the development, that's not mixed use. It has to be so many residential units within your development. And I believe we said probably 5. It's in the definitions chapter. I believe it is 5 dwelling units. So it's very flexible compared to what DCA used to make all the jurisdictions do, that it was at 30% or 50%. But you have to demonstrate that you're doing real mixed use in order to be able to get some of these density bonuses.
So kind of follow that up. So one of the things that's pretty common is you have multi-uses, and they have connective parking, walkability, and so forth, but there's separate owners, separate debt, separate structures. And the thing I have seen in certain communities is they get myopic in their assessment of mixed use, and like you say, oh, it's 3,500 feet is the appropriate to call it, quote, mixed use, which is arbitrary. It may or may not be an appropriate analysis. And so my concern a little bit is when you have people trying to do these things and now they've kind of taken a certain group of directions, like sometimes down in St. Pete, you have Fusion Apartments and the bottom floor is all retail, and that's clearly mixed use on the main street, et cetera.
Exactly.
But when you have things like Castleberry, where we do 200 apartments on the corner and all the pads and commercial is separate property lines, separate ownership, separate thing. But the city saw that as mixed use because they were separate, but they were cohesive in some way. How would you describe ours?
If it comes in as a single development plan, regardless of the ownership, it's a single development plan that is going to be designed, with coordinated approach. It is a mixed use, horizontal mixed use. We treat it differently. In certain districts, we say it has to be vertical use to get a bump up. In other districts, horizontal mixed use is okay. So we do it both ways. And this is not just to allow it, because they are both allowed, is that one gets you a little bit more in some districts. Any other questions about mixed use? Okay. Now, the last issue that I wanted to talk to you about was that relationship between the future land use map and the zoning map. Because it is very confusing today to know, okay, I have this future land use category, what can I do there? And typically you end up going PD. So we wanted to make sure that the two communicate. The picture on the left is your future land use map. The picture on the right is your zoning map. So in the past, we tried to do a table that showed that correlation between the two, and it was very hard because they were always like the but. You can do that, but the special approval, but the plan development, so it was not easy to tell somebody, yes, you could request this zoning district. So we created a table, and we're going to include it in the land development code. And it says, if you're in a residential 6 land use category, these are the zoning districts that you could request. There is a caveat there that says it's not guaranteed that you will get it, but you can request it because you still have to meet those criteria for rezoning. So, if you're in residential 12, you could do conservation, residential single family 4.5, residential single family 6, and guess what? That's where it stopped before. So wait, you're telling me that I'm in a residential 12, but I can only go up to 6 dwelling units per acre? So we created new zoning districts. Now we have residential single family 9, which would allow you for small lots. And then we also have residential multifamily 12. Sorry, before you could go up to 9, but now we have all the way up to 12. So we're using your zoning map to implement something that has been in place for many years. Now, we talked about those activity nodes before. So we are showing those with asterisks right on this table here, and they're shown in red. So like if you're in a residential 9 land use category, and you want to do one of these activity nodes, what are my options? I could request a neighborhood commercial small, all the way up to general commercial. We have that range because the Planning Commission and the board would look at the request, and depending on the location, depending on the surrounding uses, availability of services, they will decide, can we allow neighborhood commercial, which restricts you to 3,000 square feet, or should we allow them to go to general commercial, which has a much larger allowance for square footage? So that decision gets made at the rezoning level. So something else that wanted to talk about that has been a little bit confusing in the past. In the old days, we used to have variances. It's like, these are your regulations. If for some reason you cannot meet that, go through a variance. And typically, you would have to demonstrate a hardship to get a variance approved. Over the years, we have been modifying that, and somehow in the Land Development Code, we ended up with a provision that staff didn't even know it was there, so it was not being implemented. But it pretty much said that staff had the ability to waive a bunch of different things. Lot sizes, installation of improvements, lot requirements, open space. And I remember going through the reorganization. And when staff saw that, they said, Pat, we can't do that. I said, I know, that's there. I'm not proposing that. So we're taking this opportunity to clean up that section. And the way we're proposing it is that there is going to be, and it's the process on the right, a system to do waivers that are not necessarily tied to hardships. For example, I had this situation. We renovated our house. We were enclosing the carport into a garage, and it was encroaching 1 foot into the setback because the property line was diagonal and our house was not perpendicular to it. So instead of making us go through a variance process of expensive applications and advertising and staff time for 1 foot, they have a system called modification of standards. Staff looks at it, they go to the site, make sure it's not going to be a big deal, and they approve it administratively. So typically it accounts to a 10% of any numerical standard in the code. It could be setbacks, it could be height. In terms of height, it's not going to get you, much because 1 floor is always going to be more than 10%. But it's a relief for especially existing conditions that it's a little bit easier to get it done this way. Now we're saying if you're between 10 and 30% of a numerical requirement, or if it gets denied by staff, or if it is a non-dimensional standard, then you can go to the board and ask for relief from that standard. Now, if you have anything that goes larger than 30%, you better have some hardship to demonstrate, because in that case, it's not something that it's a design issue, it should be a hardship issue. So in that case, you go to the hearing officer and take it as a variance. And there are specific criteria that you have to meet. So we're cleaning up that section to make sure that there is a system. And it's not just, poof, left up to somebody to make that decision without any specific criteria. So to summarize, so we are addressing the elimination of that special approval term from the comprehensive plan. We're minimizing, but not getting rid of, the PD rezonings. We're allowing activity nodes based on commercial locational criteria. And you can do that either with standard zoning or PD zoning. We are adjusting the current zoning districts and creating some new ones to allow the higher densities and intensities that the comp plan already allows, or that we need at activity nodes, or that we need for affordable housing. And then we're creating that correlation table that I talked about. It's a lot of information, and I'm not going to go through all the details because it's a thick document, but it is available online. If anybody has any questions about any of the provisions, they can call Lisa Barrett. And the whole document is in strike through and underline, so it shows exactly what's new versus what's being deleted. But the idea is to go to the board with the first public hearing in October, and then the second hearing in November. If you have any questions at this time, I'll be glad to try to
I
answer.
just have a general comment and then a question. I appreciate all the effort that's gone into this, and I think it's a very much needed, but looking at this stuff, I think the things that are going to be problematic haven't even been considered yet. People are going to be creative in creating problems with regard to the implementation of this. Is there like a phase-in process, or is it when it's adopted, it becomes the code? And
So one good thing about land development codes that is not like comprehensive plans. Land development codes, we know that it takes time for adjustments, and they can be amended.
Okay.
There is always, and you saw it even with the reorganization, there are small amendments that come in
Okay.
and get adjusted.
And those amendments could be initiated by an applicant or staff if staff realizes that there's something that's problematic, and then they could amend it. So,
Yes.
okay. So it's not going to be just letter of the law from that point on.
It's
gonna
not
be-
set in stone in the sense that they can be amended. Now, they will be enforceable once they're adopted and effective, but staff can always come back and amend it, and applicants can always request that too.
Very good. Thank you.
And I think it's important to note that this aligns the LDC, the Land Development Code, much better with the comp plan. We went through the effort to clean up the comp plan. This is kind of getting this in sync with that.
Right. Right. Very good.
And can I just ask a question? So the goal, stepping back, the goal is to make our county understandable, effective, and more capable of exercising the development business, right?
Yes.
And fair with the people that are there already and so forth, right?
Yes, and not leaving regulations for staff to determine. The job of staff is to read the code, and if the development meets the code, then they can approve it. But if it doesn't, it's not up to them to decide that.
Right, but I'm still way up higher than that, but I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
But my question for you is this: what is the standard by which you will be deemed successful in your effort?
You're talking about like
Yes,
our
you,
consultant?
We hired you. I'm speaking as if I were part of the community that pays taxes.
When we start seeing applications coming in with mixed-use affordable housing activity nodes that will be serving the community and being an asset for the community.
And so, Ms. Tusing, may I speak to you now while you're still standing there? But you don't go away yet. So my question would be this. I'm a huge fan of this. I think this is well needed, and I think perhaps we could do it if it's done well. Will put us ahead of other places and make it a better place to stay and live and work and do all those things. What's the progress after we start to analyze this and track this and say we've done this versus that? Is that part of the programmatic exercise of this?
Yes. And
Thank you.
let me expand on that, Mr. Rudd. As we've spent a lot of time in work sessions with Board of County Commissioners, with our economic development groups, with our neighborhood services groups, community services, to allow us as a county to accept affordable housing, workforce housing, whatever you want to call it, because our code restricted or hindered developers or builders to be able to do that. Today, with many of the changes that are in here, we encourage them to do that. You can get the bonuses, you can get the density you need to make it work. This is not the end of all. This is a starting point. We've got this in sync with the comprehensive plan. Back to Chairman Connolly's comment about, okay, yeah, you can still make changes to the code. And invariably, when you do something like this, there's something that's forgotten. There's something that's missed, not intentionally, but it happens. And I think Pat, Lisa, and Margaret and their team have done a wonderful job on doing the best they can at this point. It's been written that, you know, we're bypassing public hearings. We're not going to have public hearings anymore. That's not true.
Yeah.
You know, I spent 12 hours answering emails one night that all these people got upset because they read that, oh, you're not going to have public hearings anymore. It's not true. It was written and reported that way. Public hearings are still required. You know, and today, if you've got the correct zoning today for what you want to do, you can do it. That's already been through a public hearing process. So, you know, I think this puts us in the lead on providing housing for people that support this community, and it's much needed.
When I'm a big fan of housing everywhere. I mean, one of the things I think commercial people are doing is they're recognizing that people at your site is critical. And I think, and we've got several locations in the community that could really use that, you know, could really be the vanguard for this. And I'm just trying to understand that as we go through this process, that having done all this, we still are in the development process. And I think your comments are what I wanted to hear is that, hey, we're not there yet. We've got a plan and this is the next step. So I appreciate that.
You know, we're really, the Board of County Commissioners and county staff are really working hard on this housing issue because it's a major issue. I mean, more than probably half of our professional staff in building and development services has to drive over a major bridge to get here to work every day. And they're coming from St. Pete. I want them to live here in Manatee County. They can't afford it. So we're doing something about it.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rhodes.
Just an overall comment of definitely support. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, one of the conference rooms upstairs, when we were all invited to come, and I think it was the beginning of the task. Pat, you were there along with the planning staff and building, et cetera. And we did hear, because it was an open hearing, we did hear a lot of the concerns that came from the public, from developers, all of those kind of things, especially as they related to, we really need to know what we can do here before we start thinking and, like you said, spending a lot of money, especially when it came to what the county wanted was more what we're calling now activity nodes and more affordable housing. So now, as I look through, as the whole process came through over 2 years, I could see where they could look at this, both the county and everyone outside, and say, oh, this is a better roadmap, so to speak, for me to follow to get a win-win on both sides. And I know it's been a tough road, and I remember the long meetings upstairs, but congratulations to you all as we get to this far, because I do see it as a good step forward here.
Thank you.
Well, and, you know, this commission recommended approval of our urban corridor plan many months ago. And that was a lead-in to what we're doing today, to improve that throughout the county. But we wanted to get that corridor plan first.
So that's a great example. I would love to know, and I think you'd be well served to support, because one of the things with CRAs, one of the reasons they have lost favor is they can't report. They can't figure out what they did with the money and how it affected. It would be my argument, or my recommendation, because I'm not an arguer, of course, my recommendation that we task someone within our team to say, look, we've changed these cores. These are the street levels. This is the calculation. Because we did this at Castleberry when we did the street. We took the highway and said, everybody on this street, all these commercial properties are going to be impacted, and we track the value of that. And I would say, because I don't know the standard you've made up for yourself, I know as a business person, I want to see economics. So if you said to me, I say, we rezone 75 properties in these core areas, and we're tracking them, and now they sold at this price, and now they're selling at this price, and the activity used to be 5 permits a year, and now we got 25 permits, you would go a long way in dissuading people from saying, hey, you're not getting any public hearings, and you have examples of ones that have done well. Because I argue that we can do all this stuff, and yet if we don't document it and report it, you didn't do it. Because people come in and say all kinds of things. Facts are hard to find, I like to say. And so if you have facts and you have data and you report, like you said, 20% of these things might not have to go to PUDs. I think that's a great standard. I think you ought to come back a year from now and say, after doing all this, we have 20% less PUD submissions. In some standard, either dollars or number of units or whatever. Because by doing that, you support that you have actually done things successfully. Because otherwise, everybody can say whatever they want. They just go, oh, it was terrible. I don't get any public notice. It's not really true. And I would argue that one of the things, if we vote for this, which I'm going to vote for this, you ought to say to me, Paul, in support of you committing this and walking in your community and talking to your people, I'm going to get back to you a year and I'm going to show you what we've done. Or if we haven't done it as well, then we say, okay, we need to correct it. But without a report and guidance, that's just are throwing darts in the dark. So I think.
We agree. And, it shouldn't come as a surprise to you that, you have to do those things in order to determine, have we done the right thing? Are we making progress? If we're not making progress, why? And study that. And I know that Karen Stewart, Jerry Lopez, those folks in community services, economic development, and economic development is not just restricted to commercial. It's bringing in people who are willing to invest in housing. That, we're studying all that. And we've had a number of people that couldn't make it work under our old code. Under this, they say they can make it work. I want to see results. The Board of County Commissioners wants to see results. So.
Thanks.
I agree there needs to be a measurable metric that needs to be reported and accounted for and reported. But I think there is, and I don't think it's a small thing, where we're establishing rights. These aren't just rights for developers. These are everybody in the county's rights that have the opportunity to use these documents. Previously, you had to negotiate a lot of these things, where now by right, every property owner in Manatee County will have these rights. So I think that bears mentioning along with the reporting of the information. This is something that affects every property owner in Manatee County, not just somebody interested in doing a residential or commercial type of project. So. All right, very good. What's the next step here?
Open the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Again, this is a this is a legislative matter, so it's not necessary to be sworn in, but if you have been, that's great. So is there anybody in the public who would wish to come forward and make a statement regarding this matter? Anybody at all? Okay, seeing nobody come forward, we're going to close the public comment portion of the hearing.
Mr. Chair, I have a few comments, just briefly.
Yes, ma'am, please.
So the Community Planning Act does require the county to adopt land development regulations that contain specific and detailed provisions necessary or desirable to implement the comprehensive plan. So that's why you've heard a lot of minutia, because they have to be detailed.
Right.
And to follow up on your question, yes, there will be subsequent amendments, because the scope of work for the consultant was really process improvements, moving the zone districts, implementing the matrices. But there will be more detailed amendments, not only in sign ordinance, but other chapters as well that are more substantive, that you can dwell on just that one chapter. Right now, it's just the overview of the whole thing.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
And finally, the effective date, we don't really have an established effective date yet, because I have to make sure the comprehensive plan becomes effective before we can calculate that out.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. All right. Yes, Mr. Penley.
Question for staff, please. After the agenda was published, I had an opportunity to review the amendments, and I've been involved in the process with their staff for a long time, but there was one that they, actually two that they didn't make, and on Monday, Lisa Barrett had proposed some language to Section 531.50A2. Just want to make sure that is included.
Yes, that was included as part of our update memo. You
Okay.
arrived after I had already stated that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It has to do with school safety.
Very good, thank you. Very good. Any additional items for discussion prior to calling this matter to vote? Okay. All right, the chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Ron.
I move to recommend approval of LDCT 1705, ordinance 1803, the Land Development Code text amendment, as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr.
Mr.
Rhodes.
Chair, I just want to say for the record, that is stated in the recommended motion, it's subject to ordinance 1804, Plan Amendment PA 1708, process improvements, comprehensive plan becoming effective, and also includes the change in the update memo.
Thank you. So updated memo and contingent upon the acceptance of the comprehensive plan amendments. So, very good.
For that.
So we have a motion and a second, and as noted with the details as noted by Ms. Shank. So is there any additional deliberation? Okay, the chair is going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work, guys.
Good job.
All right. All right, we have one more item on the agenda. And again, this is a presentation upon request. It is item number 9. Ms. Tusing, could you please read item number 9 into the record?
Yes, item number 9 is Z1810, which is the Sarasota Manatee Airport Authority. The Talavast rezone is quasi-judicial, and Jamie Schindewolf will be the planner, and she will do a brief presentation at this time.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, commissioners, or yes, commissioners. My name is Jamie Schindewolf. I'm a planner 1 with Manatee County, and I have been sworn. I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the doc viewer.
Okay. Did you say you're the #1 planner in Manatee County?
Yes, the #1 planner in Manatee County. You're welcome. All right. So this is a request to rezone approximately 47 acres of a 53-acre site from light manufacturing to heavy manufacturing. Just note, this is the future land use. It'll make sense in a second. The remaining acreage is to remain in, or the 47 acres are in the industrial heavy future land use category, as highlighted here. The remaining acreage is to remain in light manufacturing zoning due to a future land use designation of industrial light. The subject property is north of the county transit fleet facility and near a variety of warehouses and an industrial park. The southwestern portion is adjacent to single-family residential zone parcels. However, this is the portion of the property that is not subject to the rezoning. The positive aspects of this rezoning are that it is consistent with the neighboring properties, that the adjacent residential area is buffered from heavy manufacturing use because of the future land use categories, and that the rezoning will bring the property into consistency with its future land use category. There are no significant negative aspects. Because of the nearby residential property, staff implores the board moving forward to consider compatibility if and when a site plan is submitted for the site. Ultimately, staff does recommend approval of this rezone. I have received only general questions from the public.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Would the applicant wish to make a opening?
Can I have a question?
Oh,
first?
yes.
Is there another more detailed map that you could show really what the surrounding area looks like other than just this property one?
How about this one?
packet.
There's the general aerial.
Okay. So as I look at this, I see a lot of light industrial. But do we have any heavy industrial right now in that area?
Here's a zoomed in version. Well,
Because I know the area relatively good, and I'm trying to think as I go up and down 301. I don't know of any
This one help you?
industrial heavy on 301.
Does this help you, this map?
Yeah, but I was looking for it to see
Oh, you're looking at it in the corner.
the housing. Right.
Yes, Commissioner, the applicant is the one who requested the heavy industrial zoning, so perhaps they should express the reason for that. And what we do look at is we have adverse impact requirements that we look at when we make a determination as to whether or not a use is a heavy use or a light use. So if you noticed on the map that Jamie showed earlier, all of the black area, all this stuff designated in the black is heavy industrial, which is the intent of the comprehensive plan for it to be, this is supposed to be a heavy industrial area.
So,
Supposed to be.
Yes, but light is not, it is a perfectly acceptable zoning within the heavy industrial.
so when we talk about heavy industrial, we're talking about the zoning, not necessarily the land use or the proposed use. Is that?
Right, this is a straight zoning, so we do not know, you would look at the use table and make the determinations as to what specific uses would be considered.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rutledge.
Could I ask this question? Do we have an inventory of how much heavy industrial land is in the county available?
I don't know if we have that or not. I don't know, I can tell you, I don't know it off the top of my head.
I could possibly answer that. When we did have a request for a cement batch plant, we did inventory the heavy industrial land, but I can't give you answers now, I'm not under oath. I don't have that at my fingertips. It's been looked at.
Okay, so the reason I ask this is in Pinellas County, sorry.
We just voted on.
We do have that information available through our economic development department.
The reason I ask is Pinellas County has put a moratorium on tearing down any industrial and converting it out of industrial because as a fully built-out county, they now cannot do that anywhere. In other words, they don't have that opportunity that we have looking at us here. So my question to you would be, do we have 50,000 acres of heavy industrial available or zoned or planned to be that versus 1 million square feet of light industrial? Is that interesting to you?
As I said, I will not be able to present that information
No,
to
I
you
know, but
today.
you
But
see
that information is available, and we can provide that at the board level. I can't give you that answer right now.
I understand, but do you understand the question kind of indirectly is, maybe we should know when we make these zoning changes, how that, if we're really trying to keep some balance within our community, and maybe the ratio is 10% heavy industrial, 50% light industrial, and then others flex space. But those are kind of questions for me, I think, as a retail product you have. It seems kind of interesting to me. I don't know that it really matters for this one, but if we don't have any heavy industrial and this is a place it should go, I'm super enthusiastic about supporting it.
Just generally speaking, Ms. Tusing, isn't that one of the considerations whenever there's an amendment to the comprehensive plan, changing the future land use, they kind of do an accounting of the types of uses, and I think that's usually what they solicit input on, is the implication of doing a land use change or something. Is that correct? That's my understanding. I just don't know if.
Yes, you have a mix of different types of land uses, so you can have a diverse community. So not everything is residential, not everything is industrial, not everything is commercial.
But
We try to do a mixture. And this, and again, if you look at, as I say, I don't know the acreage, but if this is 50 acres, you have a lot of heavy industrial right here in this area. a lot of acreage that is that. A lot of it is zoned for light manufacturing, even though it's designated heavy on the future land use map. Again, the applicant's representatives are here, and they may be able to better tell you what they're proposing to do with the site and their reason for the change to heavy.
But I guess, I don't mean to keep beating this, but it seems, in other words, to do things without some context seems difficult to me. I'm fine if the land use is this and we want to keep it that, and heavy industrial, I love the airport guys, they always do a great job. So that's not the issue. I feel like you get kind of myopic, you know, you're just saying, well, I'm looking at this, I don't care about the rest of the context that it's in. Anyway.
And for the record, I think it's always interesting to know what's going to happen there, but again, this is a straight zoning, and it's what actually comes next is irrelevant. We're reviewing it to determine that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and the land development code. So.
Which it is, and I mean, there are some uses
Yes, ma'am.
that are permitted in the heavy, that are not permitted or special, special uses within the light. So that is, it opens up the possibility for different uses.
Right. So, okay, thank you. All right. Very good. Good with staff? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Bailey. Good morning.
Chairman and Commissioners, I'm Dan Bailey, attorney for the airport. With me today also is Rick Piccolo, the CEO of the airport. The airport was able to acquire this property a couple of years ago, and it includes not only the property that you're considering today, but also, if I can use the overhead for just a moment.
Mr. Bailey, have you been sworn?
I have been.
Thank you.
This property right here is also within the airport's ownership, as is this parcel right here. So it's been noted that the entire area, with the exception of that 6-acre parcel that I mentioned a moment ago, that this one right here is not, but all the rest of it is designated under your future land use plan map for heavy manufacturing. And the zoning question, I think earlier, is there any heavy manufacturing in the area? I didn't know if that related to whether their uses or whether you're talking about zoning, but you can see from this map that the parcel that I mentioned that the airport owns that goes down to Tallabass Road is already zoned for heavy manufacturing, as is the area up in the north. And what the airport's hoping to do here is, give us maximum flexibility and have the major part of the property be consistent with this part down here in terms of its zoning. I think the main thing, while it does perhaps potentially intensify some of the uses, it also has changes the floor area ratio. I think staff report noted that. So it would give us a 0.5 floor area ratio. So we have no immediate plans for this, but we are hopeful this is going to produce, be some income producing element for the airport. Probably we'll lease it out if we can get someone that is willing to develop it and allow us to have a long-term ground lease. Most of the non-aviation land adjacent to the airport or part of the airport, we have under long-term lease, and that would be our goal. I think it's, consistent with, certainly consistent with the future land use map, but it's also, I think, compatible with the neighborhood, because it doesn't really, there really are no residences immediately adjacent to it. And so that's essentially what we're about. I don't know if Rick wants to add any weight to that comment.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Rick Piccolo, President and CEO of the airport, and I have been sworn.
Thank you.
Our efforts here are simply, hopefully, as you know, the airport does not receive any tax funds, does not have taxing power. So we run the airport based on the business revenue we derive, and we purchased this property and hopeful to develop it more as industrial land. So we were looking for the most flexibility here. I went to the Farnborough Air Show with the Bradenton Area Economic Development Council. We met with 17 different companies, some of them in manufacturing, that we're trying to attract over to this community. And the airport has nearly $1 billion annual economic impact on the community, with over 11,000 jobs derived from the airport's activities in the community. And this is just an effort to continue to enhance that and bring economic development and jobs to the community.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Bailey, is that it?
Yes, sir. That
Thank you very
concludes my
much.
comments.
Thank you. All right. Have we had public comment? Okay. All right. We're going to go ahead and open this application up to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward? Anybody? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to close the public comment portion of the hearing. And are there any questions for staff or the applicant?
Yep.
Mr. Rhodes.
I applaud the airport and what they're trying to do ultimately here, get a source of income. However, I am not big on this particular project, especially the rezoning going to industrial heavy. Maybe 6 years ago, we had two contentious issues that came before us for a property that was going to be switched, one from light to heavy, and another one where it was heavy and they came in for a use. And right now, if you look at 301 across the street from you, going just a little north and then south, you'll see some light industrial and some commercial, which what they do, I have no idea. They're totally unobtrusive. Go just a little further south, and we've got a cement plant, which is industrial heavy, on University in 301. The plant that is there has been there probably before anything developed around that. My personal, and this is strictly personal, my personal opinion is I don't think that plant would be approved today, but that's an assumption. Right behind that plant, we have a couple of years ago, when I think it started development, a high-end apartment complex. And then just a little further north, we've got a new residential development. The issues with going to IH, okay, is that is obtrusive. You will see it potentially, you will hear it. It will be potential pollutant. If staff has a list of what current uses could be, I think you'd be surprised on what the surrounding area might hit. Now, you did say the one portion that you're looking at that butts up to a residential area would be not zoned heavy. But heavy influences a major area around it, which became the major issues going back 6 years ago that we had before us and went up to the county level, the Board of County. So, Ms. Tusing, do you have a listing of IH that could potentially be in this area? It's a big, big difference.
I don't have my zoning code with me. I was looking at the amendments, but the use table isn't there. So,
Yeah, page 8 in the staff report has some examples.
You say that some examples or all of the?
Some examples on page 8 of the staff report.
Okay.
Yeah, it just had some. But I remember going over those issues, and it drastically could change the noise, the activity, all of those things in that area. And right now, as far as I know, going up and down 301, there's a lot of light, which I think is great, but I don't know of any heavy other than the cement plant out the corner of University and 301. Even though this is zoned, there's other areas within here zoned, I agree. But when they come to this committee and say, hey, we want to put such and such on this, that's when we have the major issues with the public.
Ms. Tusing, have you been able to?
Yeah, I think they are as well.
All right. While we're looking for that, it's I think a question, but I'd like to. I don't know if turn it into a deliberation is quite right, but just my thoughts on this. This seems like an appropriate location for heavy industrial. We have a rail line and 301 and the airport all in this area. It seems like those elements tend to make this one of the most appropriate locations in the county for heavy industrial. I believe Mr. Rhodes, your focus is along 301, but I think if you consider west of 301, we have Sun Hydraulics in that area, and I think that's close to the old boat manufacturing facilities and stuff. So west of that area is
I agree.
yeah,
Sun
yeah,
is, to me, unobtrusive.
right.
But we're opening the window to a lot of other things
Right.
besides
Yeah.
sun, so to speak.
Right. I don't. Again,
And it's the window that I'm concerned, that
Right.
we open it up and say, hey, this could be put here.
Mr. Rutledge.
I think, for me, I would be much more sensitive about what might go there if you gave it to Bob's Warehouse Development. I have to tell you, I have great respect for the airport and how they've conducted themselves, the things that I've seen them bring to us. And so one of the things about a public trust, which they kind of manage, a right that they are given, not they own, I think it's somewhat unlikely, in my opinion. In fact, I would think they might be afraid of things that might be pollutants, huge noisemakers, dangerous, offensive to the community. I got to tell you, I think they'd be drummed out by people that are really concerned about it, and I think they'd respond to that. Now, developers, having been one, might only care about the money, and that might not bother them. But I understand the idea of having the maximum capacity so you can maximize your yield. I don't think I would say they would subvert the money for their responsibilities as a community member more than anything. So I'm a little less concerned about that. I appreciate the comment, but I think if we gave this opportunity to that group versus someone else, I would see it somewhat different.
Right. And Mr. Rutledge, that kind of reminds me, we have to, again, your point is the airport, the expectation is they're going to be good stewards
Right.
with the assets that are given in their, to their oversight. If later in the hearing, if the applicant could speak to the fact that the airport board is made up of county commissioners or has folks associated with county government, that there's going to be an oversight and how that oversight's going to continue with regard to things like
The
this.
board is appointed by the governor.
Okay.
All right, so, and we are a public agency, so in tune with Mr. Rutledge, I do think that there is a lot of, they take into account the public's greater needs here as well. That's not to say that, I'd say the only thing in interest of full disclosures, the day could come where if we can't develop it, we sell the land, and then it goes back to a private entity. But as far as the board is, it is a public agency. It is one that is very sensitive to the public, and I think the greatest way to measure this is if you look at the surrounding neighborhoods, Whitfield, Ballantyne, and we're members of that association. When we had the issue in front of this board months ago on a certain development, we were in lockstep on what our position was, and when it comes to noise, it's certainly something we generate, but we work very hard with the community to do stuff that's very compatible. And we're just looking for the maximum flexibility here, and it is in line with what's in the surrounding area. That is, I doubt we'll go out looking for someone that has a batch plant. I think our goal is to have something that's more high-end aviation type and manufacturing in those types of things so that we can develop an aviation kind of cluster around the airport. You have Saffron that's right next to the airport over on Talavast and those types of companies. So we're trying to help the community develop the aviation sector, which pays very high wages, and it is affordable housing would not be an issue for the people that work in those sectors.
Thank you. Mr. Piccolo, could you, I believe Mr. Rhodes' concerns are valid concerns. Could you address the oversight that would be a part of any consideration for use while the property is under the control of the airport?
Well, the airport board has to approve, any lease that is made
Right.
will have to be approved by our board.
So if it was a fireworks factory, somebody's going to have to.
If it's a fireworks factory, it's going to have to be approved by our board, and it has to be approved in a public meeting. It doesn't necessarily have a public hearing, but the meeting is open to the public, and there is a comment period, very similar to what you have with the Board of County Commissioners. So if there was an outcry, we certainly would hear from it, not to mention that because we work so closely with the Whitfield-Ballantyne Homeowners Association and have a great relationship with them, I'm sure that if we did something along those lines, they'd be in to talk to us before anything like that anyway. But we're not anticipating trying to develop something that causes the community consternation. We want to develop stuff that helps the community. That's part of our public purpose.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Roth.
would it be reasonable to ask, like, who you might have in mind to put on that property?
I would love to give you that, except we haven't been able to find anyone with that level of interest yet. We did meet mostly with companies, like I said, we were in Farnborough, on the manufacturing side. They had to do with microwave equipment, that type of thing, making high-end avionics equipment, those types of things that are very high-tech, not things that are very dirty, almost closer to clean room types of operations than dirty operations.
Can I just, the other point I would make is, I think for the community, we want to expand the opportunity of building jobs in that area. That aviation is one of those things, I think, as a kid, I've always, it's spectacular stuff. It's interesting. I think Florida's had a history of, with NASA and so forth. So I'd like to give them as much flexibility as they can, and then call out the things we don't like as they get that opportunity. But I'd rather let them have a bigger net. They're going out to reach out to businesses and opportunities that would be benefit to the community. And I think it would, listen, people want to live here. This is a great place, and so we can compete with anybody that's got an electronics firm north of the Mason-Dixon. And say, hey, you want to live in this area? But we need the vehicle to say we can get, because that's always kind of.
In the end, it could end up that the types of companies we have in there are light manufacturing, but we wanted to have the ability to go after as wide a spectrum of companies as possible.
Right.
Chair, Ms. Tusing has information.
Yes, Ms. Tusing.
Okay. Hello, Margaret Tusing with Building and Development Services. I have looked at the use table for the light manufacturing and the heavy manufacturing. Some of the uses, now there are some uses that are permitted in light that aren't permitted in heavy. I'm only pointing out those things that are permitted in heavy that are not considered under light. A heliport is a use that could be in heavy that is not in light. Industrial heavy, needless to say, which also includes like fire sprinkler manufacturers. Light industrial is a permitted use. Junkyards is a special permit. Railroad switching yards, sawmills, slaughterhouses, stockyards, and feedlots. So you see, those are the uses that are different than what you would be allowed to do in light manufacturing. We also have an adverse impact section of the code that these developments will have to go through. The noise, the glare, odor, it's kind of like if you can't see it, hear it, taste it, smell it, then it's an okay use to be considered for light. And all of these developments have to go through those uses. It doesn't matter if it's a light manufacturing use or a heavy. We have standards within the regulations. But to point out from a use standpoint, something that is different, those are the things that were obviously considered inappropriate for light manufacturing, but are considered okay for heavy. So it's a fairly limited use, and I don't see a majority of them going on this site.
So you haven't been reaching out to slaughterhouses lately?
No, we haven't. There's been no slaughterhouses on our.
I say that we're actually buying a slaughterhouse. That's why it's a joke to me.
How many miles is the airport from this site?
I believe it's about a half a mile.
Okay, so all the restrictions that apply to building anywhere within 3 miles of the airport would apply to this.
Well, yeah, one of the reasons that we were interested in the property was actually that it's in the approach to our alternate runway, so it gives us control of that land as well, so that we don't run into condos going up 8 stories and back in front of you complaining. So.
Very good. Any additional questions for the applicant? Or staff, for that matter, since we've gone off track here? So, very good. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we've had the opportunity to hear from the applicant on some of the matters. Mr. Rhodes, was Ms. Tusing's list sufficient for your needs?
Yes, right, but I agree, it may not happen, but if you sell the property, the promises and the oversight that you have done, as your history shows, isn't necessarily there. And I'm just saying, I can remember when this room was filled and they were sitting outside on IH issues brought before us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else? Okay. Does staff need to make any additional comments? We've covered everything?
No, thank you.
Very good. Applicant, are we good with the rebuttal? Thank you. All right, we're going to close the public hearing, and Chair will consider a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Delesline.
I move to recommend approval of 2-18-10, Sarasota Manatee Airport Authority Televast rezone, as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ross, second. All right, any additional deliberation? Okay, the chair's going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair votes aye, and the motion passes 5-1. And Mr. Rhodes, as is customary, the dissenting vote for reasons stated.
Right, for the reasons stated in my
Thank you.
concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Are there any other matters to consider today? Okay, the chair's going to call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
What time?